Subscribe to Echo Tales for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. Emma never expected anything extraordinary to happen in her quiet life. She liked it that way. Simple, predictable, and calm. Her world was made of soft routines. Morning tea on her tiny balcony, long walks with headphones tucked in her ears, evenings spent with old novels she'd read a dozen times. Her apartment was her sanctuary, a place where she could breathe without pressure, speak without being interrupted, and exist without being judged. But everything began to change on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the kind where the sky feels too heavy and the world moves a little slower. That's when Adrian arrived, dragging a battered suitcase down the hallway of their old apartment building, his laughter bouncing off the peeling walls like a warm echo. Emma was coming up the stairs with groceries when she first heard that laugh. Deep, low, and completely unbothered by how dreary the world seemed. She froze halfway up, not because the sound startled her, but because it pulled at something inside her chest, something that had been asleep for a long time. When she saw him, really saw him, he didn't look like someone who belonged in a quiet building full of older tenants and introverts. Adrian was tall, messy-haired, with eyes that seemed too sharp for someone so casually dressed. There was a guitar case slung over his shoulder and a small scar just above his right eyebrow, as if life had tried to leave a mark and failed to break him completely. Emma gave him a polite nod, the kind she gave to neighbors she didn't plan to speak to again. But he smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and said, "Looks like I'm your new neighbor." She didn't smile back. Not really. But something about his voice stayed with her all evening. That night, through the too thin walls, she heard soft strumming. He was playing guitar. Not perfectly. It was raw, almost hesitant. But it was beautiful. Music had once been part of her life, long ago, before silence became her comfort. She didn't know why, but she pressed her ear closer to the wall. Over the next few days, she noticed him more. Not because he was loud or nosy. In fact, he wasn't. But he had a strange way of making the air feel different when he was around. He greeted her in the hallway like they were old friends, even though she barely replied. He held the elevator for her without asking if she was in a hurry. And once, when she dropped a book walking back from the mailbox, he bent down, picked it up, and said, "You read this kind of stuff?" "Me too." She wanted to scoff. He didn't look like someone who read emotional literary fiction. But his eyes were honest, like maybe he did. Like maybe he'd felt some of the same sadness she had. Emma didn't trust easily. Not after what happened before. The betrayal, the way love turned into something cold and unfamiliar. She'd promised herself never again. No more falling, no more hoping, no more letting anyone close enough to leave a scar. And yet, there was something about Adrian. Something quiet, but persistent. He didn't push. He didn't flirt. He didn't pry. But he looked at her like she wasn't invisible, like he noticed more than just her polite smile and guarded tone. And for the first time in a long while, she caught herself waiting for the sound of his guitar, listening for his footsteps in the hallway, wondering if she'd see him when she stepped outside. She told herself it was nothing. Just curiosity. Just boredom. But deep down, something had already started. Something gentle. But impossible to ignore. It started with a song, not one played fully, but half strummed through the walls at 1:23 a.m., when most of the world was sleeping and only the restless were still awake. Emma had been lying in bed, wide-eyed and tangled, in old memories that refused to let her rest. That night, the melody felt softer than usual, like he was trying not to wake anyone. But she was already awake, already listening, already waiting. When the last string fell silent, She did something she didn't expect of herself. She tapped once on the wall. Just once. Then held her breath. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Silence. Maybe he didn't hear. Maybe it was stupid. But then she heard it, a gentle knockback, 3 times. And somehow that tiny sound in the dark felt more intimate than anything she'd experienced in years. That was the beginning. The next night, she knocked again. And this time, his voice followed. "You can't sleep either?" he asked, his tone soft, a little playful, but not pushy. "No," she replied after a pause. "Didn't think I'd have a neighbor who plays guitar at midnight. Didn't think I'd have a neighbor who taps on the wall like it's Morse code," he chuckled. And just like that, the wall between them began to feel less like a barrier and more like a bridge. For the next few nights, they talked like that, voices just loud enough to hear, conversations drifting between cracks in plaster and air. It was strange, how easy it felt. He asked about her favorite book. She asked why he never played the same melody twice. He said music was like emotion. It changed every time you felt it. She went quiet at that, and he didn't ask why. They talked about the little things first. Coffee preferences, childhood pets, favorite rainy day songs. But as the hours got later, their truths began to slip out. Quietly, unexpectedly, like secrets that had been waiting for the right night. Emma told him how she once fell in love with someone who promised her forever, then left without a reason. Adrian admitted that he used to play guitar for a living until his band fell apart, and grief swallowed his voice for a while. "What kind of grief?" she asked gently. He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "The kind that doesn't leave when the funeral ends." Emma didn't reply. She just pressed her palm against the wall. A silent gesture. A quiet, "I get it." They never saw each other during the day. Not yet. It was like they belonged to the night. A secret friendship built on shadows and insomnia. Emma started to crave those hours. Her world was still quiet, still protected, but now it had an echo. Him. Adrian. A man who spoke with the softness of someone who had been broken but chose to heal slowly. One night, after a long pause, he said, "I know we haven't even had coffee together, but I think I like talking to you more than most people I've actually met." She smiled in the dark, though he couldn't see it. "You don't even know what I look like when I'm not hiding behind a wall," she whispered. "Maybe I don't need to," he replied. Then, 3 nights later, the wall wasn't enough. At 12:48 a.m., a knock came, not from the side, but from her door. Emma froze, her heart stumbling. She opened it, and there he was, standing barefoot, eyes tired but kind, hands tucked in his sweatshirt sleeves. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "I thought maybe you couldn't either." She didn't speak. She just stepped aside. And in that small, unspoken invitation, everything changed. The night Adrian stepped into her apartment for the first time, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not fear, but the unfamiliar ache of being vulnerable. He didn't walk in with arrogance or expectation. He stepped in like someone entering a sacred space, quiet and respectful, his hands still tucked into his sleeves like he didn't want to take up too much space. They didn't talk much at first. He stood by the window, glancing at the rain sliding down the glass while she made tea just to have something to do with her hands. Her apartment suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too revealing. But he didn't seem uncomfortable. If anything, he looked at home, not because of the space, but because of the way his eyes kept finding her in it. Emma sat across from him on the couch, their knees just inches apart. She wrapped her fingers around the warm mug and pretended not to notice how often his gaze lingered. But she did notice. Every time. He didn't compliment her in the obvious way, no awkward flattery or practiced charm. But when he looked at her, it was like he saw all the things she thought she had hidden, the parts of her that were still bruised, the quiet strength beneath her hesitation, the loneliness she'd wrapped in independence. It made her uneasy. How naked she felt without taking off a single piece of clothing. Adrian leaned back, still watching her like he was memorizing something. "You always look like you're holding your breath," he said softly. She blinked. "What does that mean?" He smiled, not teasingly but gently. "Like you're waiting for something to go wrong." She didn't know what to say to that, because he wasn't wrong. They started talking again, but it wasn't like the wall conversations. This was slower, heavier. There was something about sharing the same air, the same space, that made the truths harder to hide. She found herself telling him about her mother, how she was always strong, always distant, and how Emma learned early on to never need anyone too much. Adrian listened without interrupting, his hand now resting just a few inches from hers on the couch cushion. "That sounds lonely," he said quietly. "It was," she admitted. But it also felt safer than being disappointed. He nodded, then looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "You know, you don't have to live like you're still protecting yourself from something that already happened." She felt that line deep in her chest, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't realized was still closed. At one point, she reached for a book on the table to show him a passage she once underlined. Something about timing and love and how sometimes people meet when they're not ready. Their hands brushed, just a moment, just a touch. But her body betrayed her. She flinched. It wasn't fear. It was too much, too intense, too soon. "I'm sorry," she said, pulling her hand back. Her voice faded. Adrian didn't move closer. He didn't reach for her again. He just sat there, hands folded, eyes patient. "It's okay," he said. "I'm not here to take anything from you." She looked at him, and her throat tightened, because part of her wanted him to try. And that scared her more than anything. When he stood to leave, he didn't ask for anything. No hug, no number, no promise of next time. But just before he opened the door, he turned to her, his voice low. "Emma, you feel like something I don't want to lose." And then he left, quietly, like a soft song that ends before you're ready for silence. And Emma stood there long after he was gone, with her hand still resting on the place where his had almost touched hers, wondering how something so gentle could shake her so deeply. For days after that night, Emma couldn't stop thinking about the way Adrian had looked at her, like she was something fragile and extraordinary, like he could see the fault lines inside her and still wanted to stay. And that terrified her. She told herself it was just kindness, just chemistry, just temporary. But deep down she knew it was something more. That was the problem. She'd worked too hard to become untouchable again, building walls from routines, patching old wounds with silence, training her heart not to leap at soft gestures. But now, every time she heard a footstep in the hall, her heart jumped. Every time her phone buzzed, she half hoped it was him, and then hated herself for hoping. So she did what felt safest. She began to pull away. It wasn't obvious. Emma still smiled when they passed in the hallway. She still nodded when he said, "Hello," but her replies were shorter. Her tone was polite instead of warm. She didn't knock on the wall anymore, and she never opened the door at night, even when she heard his quiet footsteps lingering just outside. She told herself she was protecting them both, from expectations, from disappointment, from the slow unraveling that always followed anything good in her life. But in truth, she was scared. Because Adrian wasn't like the others. He wasn't trying to chase her. He was just showing up. And somehow that made it even harder to handle. A week passed. Then 2. And then one evening, as she came home from the store, arms full, headphones in, trying to pretend her heart wasn't sinking every time she passed his door, he was suddenly there. Not waiting, just there. He had just stepped out to take his trash down, and they nearly collided in the hallway. Her bag dropped, and before she could reach down, he was already picking up the spilled apples, his movements calm, his face unreadable. "Hey," he said softly. She mumbled a quiet thank you and tried to keep walking, but he stood up and said her name. Not loudly, just firmly enough that she had to stop. "You're running," Adrian said. Emma turned slowly, her fingers curling tighter around the grocery bag. "I'm not running," she replied, voice low. "I'm just—" She paused, searching for a reason that didn't sound like fear. "I'm protecting myself." He nodded, not arguing, not accusing, just standing there, steady as ever. "Is it me you're afraid of?" he asked. "Or what I make you feel?" The hallway seemed to shrink around her. The noise of the world disappeared. It was just his question hanging between them. Simple, devastating, and completely true. She swallowed hard. "I've felt something like this before," she whispered. "It didn't end well." He nodded again. "I know," he said. "Me too." She met his eyes then, and for the first time, she saw it. The ache behind his calm, the fear he carried too. This wasn't just her fight. He was scared too. But unlike her, he wasn't letting that fear stop him from showing up. "I'm not asking you to fix anything," Adrian said, his voice quieter now. "And I'm not expecting some grand love story. But I can't pretend I don't feel something real when I'm near you. And I won't keep chasing a closed door." Emma stood there frozen, her thoughts loud and chaotic, her heart aching with the weight of everything she wanted and everything she was afraid to lose. And just like that, without raising his voice, without begging, he stepped back. Not walking away, just giving her space. A chance. A choice. And as he turned and walked toward his door, she whispered something so softly it almost disappeared. "I don't know how to do this." He paused, looked back, and with a tired smile, he said, "Then let's figure it out, together." Emma didn't say yes that night, but she didn't say no either. And sometimes, between two people who've been hurt before, that soft space, that maybe, is more sacred than any promise. After Adrian's words echoed down the hallway, something inside her softened. Not all at once, not like in the movies, but gradually, like frost melting on a windowsill. The next night, she didn't knock on the wall. But she didn't wear her headphones either. She listened. And when the guitar began, low, thoughtful, slow, she closed her eyes and let it in. The sound didn't demand anything of her. It didn't press against her wounds. It just stayed, like he did. The next morning, she found a small note under her door. "Coffee? No pressure. Just company." Her fingers trembled around the paper. She didn't know how to say yes with words. So instead, she baked. An old family recipe, lemon muffins, still warm when she knocked gently on his door. Adrian opened it with sleep-tousled hair and surprise written all over his face. But it quickly melted into a smile that made her stomach twist, not with anxiety, but with something warmer. "I'll trade you coffee for muffins," he said. She nodded, silent but steady. Inside, the apartment was quiet, comfortable, scattered with sheet music and half-read books. It felt lived in, real. And for the first time she sat close enough to him that their shoulders nearly touched. They talked about nothing at first. Favorite breakfast foods, how he hated cold showers, how she couldn't eat cereal without reading the box. She laughed more than she expected to, and every time she did, he looked at her like it was a miracle. Later, as the rain returned, soft, rhythmic, he picked up his guitar again. "I want to play something I've been writing," he said. "It's not finished and it's messy. Like most things in my life." Emma folded her knees beneath her and nodded. "Go ahead." The song started gently, like footsteps in a quiet room. His voice joined, low and raw, and it made her chest tighten. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be, because it was honest. Somewhere halfway through, her hand found the edge of the couch cushion between them. He noticed. He didn't rush, just slid his hand next to hers, close but not touching. She could have pulled away, should have, but she didn't. She let it be there. Let the closeness fill the space between them. And still, something inside her resisted. Not because she didn't want more, but because she did. Because she could feel herself falling, softly, helplessly. And it scared her how much she liked the way he looked at her when she wasn't talking. How he never asked her to be anyone but exactly who she was. It scared her how she leaned in when she laughed. How she caught herself watching his hands when he played. She couldn't handle the idea of opening herself up again, of giving someone the power to leave. But at the same time, she didn't want him to stop. She didn't want him to stop looking at her like that, or playing for her, or sitting beside her in quiet companionship. That night, as she stood to leave, he followed her to the door. The air was thick with something unspoken. Not pressure, just possibility. "Emma," he said softly as she reached for the handle. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere unless you ask me to." She turned slowly, her heart a battlefield of fear and want. "What if I don't know what to ask for yet?" she whispered. Adrian's eyes were warm, steady. "Then I'll wait," he said. "Just don't ask me to stop showing up." She didn't reply, but the way she lingered in the doorway, the way her fingers brushed his as she left, that was enough. For now. Emma used to believe that people always left, that no matter how gentle their hands or how sincere their words, there came a day when something shifted, and they walked away. So when Adrian didn't, she didn't know what to do with that kind of steady. Days passed, then weeks, and he stayed. Not loudly, not with grand gestures, but with quiet consistency that wrapped itself around her like warmth on a cold morning. He never pushed. He never demanded. He just kept showing up, in ways that mattered. He'd leave notes under her door when he knew she'd had a long day. He'd play the guitar softly when she couldn't sleep. He'd sit with her in silence, when words felt too heavy, and somehow, all of it began to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, not everyone leaves. Their connection deepened not in fast declarations, but in the gentle rhythm of everyday things. Like when she let herself fall asleep next to him, on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder, and woke to find his hand still there, not moving, just holding her like she mattered. Or when he walked her home after dinner one night and didn't try to kiss her, just walked beside her like that was enough. Because it was. The intimacy they built wasn't made of fireworks. It was made of trust, of breath, of the courage it takes to let someone in when your heart still carries bruises. Emma didn't say she loved him. Not with words. But she showed it in the way she started knocking on the wall again. In the way she started writing little pieces of her story and letting him read them. In the way she finally let herself lean into him fully when they sat on the balcony at night. two quiet souls watching the city lights flicker like tiny promises. One evening, as fall crept into the air, Adrian asked her what she was most afraid of. She thought for a long time, then said, "I'm afraid that the moment I believe this is real, something will break it." He nodded, not trying to fix her fear, just honoring it. "Then let's not chase forever," he said gently. "Let's just be here, now, and let that be enough." And for once, it was. Because he never made her feel like she had to become someone else to be worthy of love. He just saw her, fully, and stayed anyway. There were still hard days. Moments when Emma recoiled without meaning to. Nights when she pulled away because the old fear gripped her too tightly. But Adrian never stopped being patient. Never stopped offering space without distance, warmth without pressure. Every time she tried to shut him out, he gently reminded her, not with words, but with presence, that he was still there, still choosing her. One night, after a particularly hard conversation, she finally broke. Tears she'd kept buried, for years spilled over, and she cried into his chest, repeating the same sentence over and over. "I don't know how to be loved like this." And he just held her, whispering, "Then let me show you, one day at a time." She never asked him to stay, but he did. Through the quiet, the mess, the slow healing, through the fear and the hope, he didn't leave when she closed off. He didn't stop when she stumbled. And somehow, that was the real love story. Not the dramatic declarations or the perfect kisses, but the simple, everyday choosing of each other. Emma didn't know where their story would go next. But as she sat beside him that night, her hand in his, the wall between their apartments long forgotten, she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't handle it at first. She was terrified of it. But she didn't want him to stop. And he didn't.